Hi, welcome to America Uncovered. I'm your host, Chris Chappell. The U.S.-China trade war is heating up, and the Trump administration is going head-to-head with the Chinese Communist Party. First, there was Trump's $50 billion in tariffs, followed by an additional $200 billion for a total of $250 billion in tariffs on Chinese goods. The U.S. also has expanded its power to restrict dangerous Chinese investments, as well as the export of nuclear technology to China. But now, a new front in the U.S.-China trade war has opened up, and that's... Wait a minute. Shelley, is this America Uncovered or China Uncensored? Okay. Just checking. Anyway, a new front in the U.S.-China trade war has opened up, and that's foreign investment. In the beginning of October, President Trump signed the Better Utilization of Investments Leading to Development, or BUILD Act, which is a terrible name, but a good acronym. The BUILD Act was passed by wide majorities in both the House and Senate as part of a larger bill to reauthorize the Federal Aviation Administration. Okay, that seems like a strange thing to do since it doesn't have anything to do with the FAA. It's like going to buy groceries for dinner and throwing in a pack of toaster strudels into the cart along with the broccoli because, hey, why not? Anyway, the BUILD Act combined several smaller government agencies into the new U.S. International Development Finance Corporation, or IDFC. Not as great of an acronym, but it does have a great amount of money. The IDFC will be given $60 billion to invest in developing nations around the world, mostly in Africa. This is a result of a bipartisan push from lawmakers, administration officials, advocates, and think tank experts. The goal is to counter Chinese investment around the world. Countering China, one of the few things both Democrats and Republicans can agree on. The problem was U.S. investment in developing nations couldn't compete with China. The IDFC replaces the old agency that used to handle these kinds of deals, the Overseas Private Investment Corporation, or OPIC. I know another acronym, but don't worry, it's getting dissolved. According to this paper from the libertarian think tank, the Competitive Enterprise Institute, OPIC is institutionally ill-suited to its mission and harms poor people around the world. Its investments in developing countries are well-intentioned, but intentions are not results. That is because OPIC's investment decisions are heavily politicized, which means that many OPIC-financed projects, rather than helping the least well-off, end up enriching the politically connected. Although OPIC made almost $4 billion for the U.S. government in the past 10 years, it was widely seen as needing a big overhaul. In its 2017 budget, the Trump administration wanted to slash OPIC's budget to almost nothing. Instead, OPIC is one of the agencies that will be merged into the $60 billion IDFC. Besides doubling OPIC's old budget, the new IDFC will be able to make equity investments that OPIC wouldn't. Plus, deals and loans can be made in local currencies. In other words, the new IDFC will be better at making deals. And it's gotten some interesting supporters, like Representative Ted Yoho, a member of the House Freedom Caucus, which has traditionally been against foreign aid, just like President Trump. Yoho told the New York Times, "I've changed, and I think Trump has changed, and it's all about China. My whole impetus for running for Congress in the first place was to get rid of foreign aid. It was my thing. But if we can reformulate and modernize it, yeah, I have no problem with that. There are people who want to do this for humanitarian aid. Fine. There are people like me who want to do this for national security." Although the U.S. gives the most amount of foreign aid to places like Africa, the Chinese Communist Party has been beating the U.S. on foreign investment for years, and it has become a national security threat. In 2013, Chinese leader Xi Jinping launched the Belt and Road Initiative. It's a theoretically $1 trillion construction and investment initiative between China and more than 100 countries. And it's all sunshine and singing children, at least according to this propaganda song created by Chinese state-run media.
The future's coming now. The Belt and Road is how. We share the goodness now. The Belt and Road is how.
But the Chinese Communist Party is using the Belt and Road to infiltrate developing nations around the world. just like how that song has infiltrated your mind. Oh, 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 oh. But what those smiling, singing children don't tell you is that the downside of taking Chinese money is you may get buried under a mountain of debt you can never repay, like the Maldives. It took big Chinese loans. Now, its debt to GDP ratio is nearly 100%, meaning it owes as much in debt as its entire economy generates in 1 year. Sounds kind of like me and my student loans. If my lender were an authoritarian regime that wanted to set up a military base in my living room. Joke's on you, authoritarian regime. I live in New York City, and there's no way a military base can fit into my living room. But it could potentially fit in Sri Lanka. In 2010, China put up a $1.5 billion loan to build a giant port in the town of Hambantota, even though it barely has any shipping traffic. Now, while that may sound like a bad investment, it wasn't, at least not for China. When Sri Lanka couldn't pay back the debt, the government was forced to sign away the entire port to China with a 99-year lease. There is concern that the Chinese will transform its 99-year lease of the Sri Lankan port of Hambantota into another naval base. China might establish more military bases around the world now, and the Belt and Road is how. Oh, oh, oh. And take Africa. China wants to use its investments in Africa to wean itself off exports to the U.S. in the long term. At a seminar in Beijing, former Chinese Vice Minister of Commerce Wei Jianguo said China plans to increase the value of its exports to Africa to $500 billion annually, and thus use Africa to replace the United States as China's largest export market. The U.S. currently imports $500 billion of Chinese goods. So if Africa replaces the U.S. market, the U.S. will lose its leverage to win the trade war with China and to rein in the Chinese Communist Party's global ambitions, the kind that come with setting up debt traps in people's living rooms. That's why, when the $60 billion BUILD Act was first passed by the House of Representatives in August, but before it was approved by the Senate, China announced its own $60 billion plan just to Africa alone. And this is one advantage China has. It doesn't need to go through a political process like Congress because the Chinese Communist Party and the government it controls don't need support from the people who elect them. They can make investment plans like this. It doesn't even matter if the investments will be profitable. According to Chinese economist He Qinglian, investments are being made regardless of their profitability. The absence of a dividing line between aid and investment is not only a unique characteristic, but also a strength. That's because the Communist Party understands it must beat the U.S. in global trade if it's going to survive. But the U.S. has an advantage too. Most developing nations would rather use American-led financing. It's just that China has been making all the offers. Part of the reason U.S. investment is preferred is because U.S. investment is structured more fairly. The key to its success, development officials said, is to create a new system that will carefully vet investments for maximum economic and political impact, and to ensure that projects don't fail as a result of corruption and mismanagement. But even though the BUILD Act has been signed into law, experts estimate that it could take up to a year for the new IDFC to get up and running. When it does, it will give loans, loan guarantees, and political risk insurance to companies that are willing to invest in developing countries. According to Congressman Yoho, the goal of the IDFC is to take countries from aid to trade and help developing countries become robust trading partners with the U.S. So what do you think of the new front in the U.S.-China trade war? Leave your comments below. And remember, neither the U.S. or Chinese government is investing in this show. So we rely on your support to keep the show going. Head over to patreon.com/AmericaUncovered to learn about how you can support this show with, for example, $1 or $60 billion. The choice is up to you, really. Every bit helps. So once again, I'm Chris Chappell. Thanks for watching America Uncovered.